Hey, so I literally just recorded this and then messed up and wasted about 15 minutes of my life. So here's take two. Solving equations. I'm going to try to go faster over this first part because it should mostly be review. So you know your goal is always to get the variable by itself. So in this case I used x because that's what we normally do. So on the first one, to get that x by itself, we got to get rid of that plus 9. Hopefully you remember that you always do opposite. So the opposite of plus 9 is minus 9. So we subtract 9 from both sides. We got 5x equals 25. 5x is 5 times x, so the opposite of multiplying by 5 is dividing by 5. What you do on one side of the equal sign, you always do on the other. You get x equals 5. On the next one, if there's x's on both sides, you need to get them on the same side. I always say move the smaller one because it's easier to move something smaller than larger, usually, depending on its density and all that. Negatives are always smaller than positives, so I'm moving the negative 4x by adding it to both sides. That becomes 11x plus 6 equals 28, which we just basically solved a second ago. Subtract 6 from both sides, divide both sides by 11, you get x equals 2. The last one, there's two ways to do it, and we'll see both ways in a minute, but if the numbers are nice, it's quite simple to just divide both sides by 5. And that's just going to get rid of that 5, leaving you x plus 3 equals 4. Those parentheses are basically useless now because there's nothing multiplying them. So it's just minus 3 on both sides, and you get x equals 1. You can always check your answers by plugging them back in. So if you have 1 plus 3 is 4, 4 times 5 is 20. On this one you have a 2. 7 times 2 is 14, 14 plus 6 is 20. Remember that. Plug it back in here, you get 4 times 2 is 8, 28 minus 8 is also 20, so we're good. So the next one, there's just slightly more steps. You always want to try to get rid of whatever's not in the fraction first, just to make it easy. So we can get rid of that plus 1 by subtracting 1 from both sides. Now a fraction, when it says over 4, that's really saying divide by 4. Opposite of dividing is multiplying. So we're going to multiply both sides by 4. The big thing to remember is that all we're doing here is canceling the 4 out. That 4 is not multiplying anything on that numerator. So the only thing is the 4 goes away. Leaving you 3 parentheses x plus 2 minus 7 equals 8. Add 7 to both sides. 3 parentheses x plus 2 and parentheses equals 15. Now, instead of dividing like we did before, you could also distribute, and you get 3x plus 6 equals 15. It's minus 6. Divide by 3, you get x equals 3. And then we can plug that back in. 3 plus 2 is 5. 3 times 5 is 15. 15 minus 7 is 8. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 2 plus 1 equals 3. Solving for variables is just getting one letter by itself. So if we want to solve for y, we need to get rid of that e squared t. So the thing to remember here is that when the letters are next to each other, they're being multiplied. So that means to get the y alone, all we got to do is divide both sides by e squared t, because these t's will cancel out, e squareds will cancel out, leaving you y all by itself. This is a little confusing to look at, so another way to think of it is we're dividing by e squared t over 1. Flip the fraction and multiply, and you get 3jo equals over e squared t squared, because t times t is t squared, equals y. Now we've got to simplify, and I've made a mistake here, so if you see the mistake, well, you can tell me, like, oh my gosh, Gallo, I can't believe you messed up. But this e and an e squared here cancel out, leaving you an extra e on the bottom. So it really should be 3jo over e t squared equals y. Okay, so just to reiterate, there's an e that goes there. This is a slightly more difficult question because there's y's on both sides now. So what you want to do is get the y's on the same side. So I'm going to add y, because the figure moving a single y is easier than moving a 4xy. You get 4xy plus 6 equals negative 7. You can't add the 4xy and the y because they're not exactly the same. One's a 4xy and the other one's a normal y. Move everything without a y to the other side. So I'm subtracting 6 from both sides. You get 4xy plus y equals negative 13. That's because now we're going to factor out the variable we're solving for. So we're trying to get that y outside a parenthesis. So if you factor out a y, you get y parentheses 4x plus 1 equals negative 13. The reason that's good is now we can divide both sides by 4x plus 1. Canceling it out on this side, 4x's go away, plus 1 goes away, leaving you y equals negative 13 over 4x plus 1. And that's your answer. So when you have these questions where you have to factor out, you're going to get something like that. Switching gears just a little bit, now we have quadratic equations. That's things in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. There's two ways to do it: factor and solve for 0, or quadratic formula. Factoring is generally quicker. The problem is you can't use it for everything. Quadratic formula will work for all of them. So when you're solving by factoring, first thing you need to know is it has to equal to 0. So now I have x squared plus 5x equals 24. We got to subtract 24 from both sides to get that equals 0 there. Now you're going to factor it. You get x plus 8, x minus 3 equals 0. Now we're just going to solve each of those parentheses for 0. X plus 8 equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0. Subtract 8 from both sides, add 3 to both sides. You get x equals negative 8, x equals 3. Quadratic formula, once again, for ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, you've got to memorize this formula. That's a must. You're in pre-calc now. Quadratic formula should be something that you should know. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So, I'm using the same question. It's the same first step. You've got to be equal to 0 because that's what the quadratic formula says. A equals 1 because if there's nothing in front of the x squared, it's a 1. B equals positive 5, c equals negative 24. Now we plug in the formula. X equals negative 5 plus minus square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 24 all over 2 times 1. Negative 5 plus minus 5 squared is 25. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 24 is positive 96. So you got to be very mindful of your negatives. Add those together, you get negative 5 plus or minus square root of 121 over 2. Square root of 121 is 11. So now it turns into two questions. Negative 5 plus 11, it's hard to see my negative there, over 2. And negative 5 minus 11 over 2. Negative 5 plus 11 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16. Negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8, which if you look, that's the same answers we got. In general, and we'll talk about this later, when there's an x squared, that means there should be two answers, usually. Just a note, if you had a question like x squared equals 7, like a normal thing, you'd square root both sides, you get, oh, x equals square root of 7. We've got to know, like I said, there's in general, if an x squared, there's two answers. And the two answers are positive, negative. And the reason for that is two negatives make a positive. So the positive square root of 7 times positive square root of 7 is in fact 7. Negative square root of 7 times negative square root of 7 is also positive 7 because the two negatives make positive. In the quadratic formula, this part under the square root is called the discriminant. If that discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, is greater than 0, you have two real solutions. If b squared minus 4ac equals to 0, you have one real solution. If b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, which means it's negative, there's no real solutions. It only has imaginary solutions, which we'll talk about the next section. Last thing is fractional equations. It's the hardest thing to wrap your head around, but it's not too bad. First step always is to factor any denominators. Generally in this section, you're always going to try to factor anything you can factor. On this one, that's only the middle one. We can factor out a GCF of x, leaving you 2 over x plus 3 over x, x minus 2 equals 7 over x minus 2. Multiply everything by the GCF of the denominators, which is the combination of all of them with no repeats. So you combine everything here on the bottom, x minus 2, x minus 2, but don't repeat anything. So we only need one x and we only need one x minus 2. So you see x minus 2 multiplying all three of them. Then we're going to cancel out denominators. What that means is there's an x here and an x here. They cancel out. X minus 2, they all cancel out. And on this one, the x minus 2's cancel out. So really all we've done is tried to get rid of every single fraction, so we don't have to worry about fractions. Now you're going to multiply out and solve. So x minus 2 times 2 is 2x minus 4. Everything canceled out here, leaving you just a positive 3. And 7 times x is 7x. And now simplify and solve. Minus 4 plus 3 is minus 1. Get the x's on the same side. 2x is smaller than 7x, so I'm going to subtract. Now to get the x by itself, we divide by 5, leaving you x equals negative 1 over 5. And that is your answer.